My name is Gordon, and I'm 70 years old. For 45 of those years, I was a dealer in rare and antiquarian books. It's a quiet profession, one that teaches you a deep and abiding respect for the tangible. You learn that paper has a memory. It holds the oils from the hands that held it, the subtle impressions of the pen, the very DNA of its time and place. Ink tells a story all its own, how it oxidizes, how it bleeds into the fibers of the page. My life has been a study of authenticity, of spotting the telltale signs of a forgery, the subtle discord that screams, "I am not what I seem." I never imagined that this lifetime of study would be what I'd need to save myself, not from a clever con man trying to sell me a fraudulent first edition, but from my own daughter. It started, as these things so often do, with a gesture of feigned concern. She called it getting my affairs in order. I call it the day she tried to erase my life's work with a single, sloppily forged signature. She thought she was clever. She thought I was a doddering old relic, as dusty and out of touch as the tomes on my shelves. But she forgot what I do. I don't just read the words on the page. I read the page itself, and the story that page told me was one of breathtaking betrayal. So I did what any man in my position would do. I smiled, I thanked her for her help, and I began to prepare. She thinks she's been emptying my accounts for the past few months. In reality, she's been building my case, one greedy, arrogant, and beautifully documented mistake at a time. This isn't just a story about money. It's about a man deciding he's worth more than the paper his assets are printed on. The air in my study has a particular scent, a mix of old leather, decaying paper, and the faint, sweet smell of bookbinder's paste. It's a perfume I've lived with my entire adult life, the smell of my sanctuary. But last Tuesday, it was tainted by something else, the cloying, floral scent of my daughter Charlotte's perfume, a fragrance that always smelled aggressively cheerful, as if it were trying to shout down any other emotion in the room. She stood over my desk, a sheaf of papers held in her perfectly manicured hands, her smile just a little too bright. She said, "Gordon, it's just routine. Mr. Peterson from the brokerage sent these over. It's to simplify things, you know, for later." Her use of my first name was a recent development. Not Dad, not Pop, Gordon. It was a subtle shift, one I'd noticed over the last year. It felt like she was addressing a subordinate, a project to be managed. "Mr. Peterson, my broker for 30 years, a man who sends me a bottle of single malt scotch every Christmas, would never send a stack of documents like this without a personal call first." That was the first note of discord, the first hairline crack in the varnish. I took the stack from her. It was heavy, maybe 20 pages, held together by a large clip. The top pages were what I expected, updates to beneficiary designations, standard disclosures, the kind of corporate chaff that keeps the legal department employed. I'm 70, not senile. I've been managing my own investments since before Charlotte knew how to spell portfolio, but I played my part. I put on my reading glasses, squinting a little for effect. "Oh, this all looks very complicated, Charlotte. Thank you for helping your old man out." Her smile widened, a predatory gleam in her eyes that she thought was hidden by a mask of filial duty. She patted my hand. Her touch was cold. "Of course, Gordon. That's what I'm here for. Just sign on the dotted lines. I've marked them with little yellow stickies for you. To make it easy." She had indeed. Little yellow arrows pointing to signature lines on half a dozen different forms. I leafed through them, a performance of due diligence. Everything seemed innocuous enough. A form to allow her to speak to the broker on my behalf. A form to update my address, though it hadn't changed in 40 years. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, a slow and steady erosion of my autonomy disguised as helpfulness. I signed a few of the more harmless ones, my hand moving slowly, deliberately. I made my signature a little shaky, the way she expected it to be. When I got to the last one, I paused. The little yellow sticky was attached to a single detached page. It was a signature block, and nothing else. Above it were the final paragraphs of what was clearly a much longer document, talking about the transfer of all assets, rights, and titles held within the account. A full transfer of assets. A financial execution. I looked up at her. "Where are the other pages for this one?" She waved a dismissive hand, the gesture breezy and practiced. "Oh, it's just legal boilerplate. Mr. Peterson said this is the only page that matters. It's all standard stuff." Trust me, it wasn't about revenge then. At that moment, it was just a cold, sinking feeling, a hollow space opening up in my chest. Trust. The word hung in the air between us, thick and sour. I've built my life on trust, trusting the provenance of a book, trusting the word of a fellow dealer, trusting the look in a collector's eye. But I did not trust the look in my daughter's. I signed it. I watched the tip of my own pen form the familiar loops and angles of my name on that single orphaned page. Her relief was palpable, a visible relaxing of her shoulders. She gathered the signed pages, clipped them together with a neat final snap, and placed them in a large leather satchel. Not a wallet, but something far more imposing. She kissed the air near my cheek, the cloud of her perfume making my eyes water. "You just rest, Gordon." I sat at my desk for a long time, the ghost of her perfume still hanging in the air. The little yellow sticky she'd used to mark the final signature page had fallen off and lay on my desk. My hands, I noticed, were perfectly steady. The feigned tremor was gone. It wasn't until later that evening, when I was tidying up, that the full, sickening truth revealed itself. She had been so neat, so organized, but she'd made one small, arrogant mistake. In her haste to collect her prize, she had missed a page. Tucked under my desk, blotter was a single sheet from the stack she had brought. It was the original signature page from the full transfer of assets document, the one she had replaced with a forgery. I picked it up. My heart didn't race. It went cold and still. A lifetime of habit took over. My fingers, sensitive from decades of handling vellum, parchment, and laid paper, instantly registered the difference. The page in my hand was a high-quality 32-pound linen stock, the kind my brokerage uses for all its official correspondence. It has a distinctive watermark, a subtle texture, a certain heft. It feels like money. It feels like security. I walked over to my bookshelf, to the collection of authenticating tools I keep. Under the soft glow of my desk lamp, I held the page. I didn't need the watermark detector or the magnifying glass, but I used them anyway, out of a sense of ritual. The fibers were long. The finish was crisp. It was genuine. Then my eyes fell on the trash can next to my desk. In her clinical efficiency, she had thrown away the little yellow stickies she'd peeled off the forms, all except one. The one from the final fake signature page. It was still attached to a small torn-off corner of the page, where she had hastily ripped it from a larger sheet. I retrieved the small corner of paper, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't linen stock. It was cheap, 20-pound copy paper. The kind you buy in a ream of 500 sheets from an office supply store for $5. The fibers were short, the finish was flat, the texture was slick and lifeless. She had printed a copy of the final page, the page that would give her everything, on a sheet of cheap copy paper, hoping I wouldn't notice. She had slipped her manufactured page into the stack and presented me with the genuine signature page, detached from its preceding pages, to sign. Then, in the shuffle, she must have swapped them, putting my authentic signature on her worthless photocopy of the signature block, and clipping the pre-signed forgery to the actual transfer document. Or so she thought. In her haste, she left the real, unsigned signature page behind, and took my real signature on a worthless piece of paper. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. The contempt. She didn't just think I was old. She thought I was an idiot. I stood there, in the quiet of my study, holding two pieces of paper. One, the symbol of a life's work, of prudence and care. The other, a cheap, worthless scrap that represented a betrayal, so profound it felt like it had a physical weight. I had spent my life studying the hands that write on paper. I could tell the difference between a scribe's steady hand and a forger's tremor. I knew the subtle ways an author's personality showed in the slant of their letters, but I had never thought to study the hand of my own child. I had never thought I'd need to. In that moment, surrounded by the silent witnesses of history on my shelves, a cold, hard resolve began to form in my chest. It wasn't about anger. It was about something far quieter and more dangerous. It was about precision. She wanted to play a game of paper and ink. Fine. I had been the master of that game for nearly half a century. The charade was over. My charade was just beginning. The days following that discovery were a lesson in emotional anatomy. I learned exactly where grief lives in the body, a heavy cold stone just below the breastbone. I learned that betrayal has a taste, metallic and sharp, like an old coin held on the tongue. I spent hours in my study, the real signature page, and the cheap, fraudulent corner of paper lying side by side on my desk. They were a testament, a diptych of my life, what I had built and what my daughter had tried to tear down. My mind kept replaying the scene, her bright, false smile, the condescending pat on my hand, the little yellow arrows. Each memory was a fresh turn of the knife. What kind of person does this? What kind of daughter looks at her father, the man who taught her to ride a bicycle, who walked her down the aisle, who held her own child in his arms for the first time, and sees nothing but a dollar sign, an obstacle to be removed? I found myself drifting back in time, searching for the root of this corrosion. I remembered Charlotte as a little girl, her face full of genuine light. My wife Eleanor and I, we thought we had done everything right. Eleanor was the heart of our family, a woman of such warmth and integrity that she made everyone around her better. She believed in kindness above all else. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe we were too kind, too soft. We gave Charlotte everything she ever asked for, but we forgot to teach her the value of anything. I remember one Christmas when she was 16. She'd wanted a specific, ridiculously expensive designer coat. We'd told her it was too much, that we could get her a perfectly beautiful coat for a fraction of the price. She didn't scream or yell, she just grew quiet. For a week she treated us with a polite, chilling distance. She spoke only when spoken to. She made us feel like we had failed her in some fundamental way. Eleanor, bless her heart, couldn't bear it. She caved. We bought the coat, and the moment Charlotte put it on, the warmth returned. Her smile was back. She hugged us. But looking back now, I see it for what it was. It wasn't a gift. It was a ransom payment. That was the first time she'd held our love hostage. It wouldn't be the last. After Eleanor passed away 10 years ago, that quiet, manipulative chill became Charlotte's primary tool. The requests for money started small. Help with a car payment here, a down payment on a new condo there. It was always framed as a loan, but the repayment dates were always nebulous, shifting targets that never arrived. She'd say things like, "Mom would have wanted to help me." And what was I to do? She and my grandson, Leo, were the only family I had left. The thought of that chill descending again, of being cut off from my own grandson, was a fear she knew how to exploit. I see that now. My love for Leo was her leverage. It wasn't kindness that made me write those checks. It was fear. That was a bitter pill to swallow. I, Gordon Miller, a man who could spot a fake Shakespearean quarto from 20 paces, was a coward in my own home. My life's work wasn't just an abstraction. It was built, book by book, deal by deal. I started with nothing but a good eye and a love for the printed word. I remember my first major acquisition, a slightly damaged but authentic copy of Galileo's Sudrius Nuncis. I used every penny I had. I spent 3 months painstakingly restoring the binding myself, working late into the night at our small kitchen table. Eleanor bringing me coffee and telling me I was mad. When I finally sold it to a university library for 5 times what I paid, that was the seed from which everything grew. The money in that brokerage account wasn't just a number on a screen. It was 45 years of late nights, of dusty auction houses, of the thrill of discovery, of risks taken and rewarded. It was the legacy of that kitchen table, and Charlotte had tried to steal it with a piece of 20-pound copy paper. The insult was as deep as the attempted theft. I spent a weekend in a fog of despair. I'd pick up a book, a beautiful hand-bound volume of poetry, and feel nothing. The words blurred. The leather felt like dead skin. The scent of my own library, once a comfort, now felt like the air in a mausoleum. I was mourning the loss of a daughter who I had to admit probably never really existed. I was mourning the image of her I had so desperately held on to. This was my low point. Alone in a house full of treasures, I had never felt so impoverished. On Sunday evening, the phone rang. It was Leo. "Hey, Grandpa, how are you doing?" His voice, young and full of an easy, uncomplicated warmth that his mother had long since lost, was like a lifeline. "I'm all right, son, just puttering around." "How are you?" "Great. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. Mom is planning this huge surprise trip for us to Italy after my graduation. Isn't that amazing? She said she's been saving up for years. She wants to show me where Grandma's family was from." And there it was. The catalyst. The lightning strike that cleared the fog. Italy. A trip for two to Italy. First class all the way, no doubt. The trip Eleanor and I had always dreamed of taking but never had the time. The trip I had planned to take Leo on myself for his graduation. Charlotte wasn't just stealing my money. She was stealing my memories, my dreams, and repackaging them as her own. She was trying to buy my grandson's affection with my own legacy. A cold, clear anger washed over me, pushing aside the grief. It was a clean, righteous anger, and it felt like coming up for air. The stone in my chest dissolved, replaced by a core of solid steel. She had made a critical miscalculation. She assumed my love for Leo would keep me paralyzed. She never considered that my love for Leo would be the very thing that would force me to act. I couldn't let him be raised by a person like that, believing her lies, admiring her for a generosity she had stolen. I had to show him the truth, not just for my sake, for his. I spoke into the phone, my voice steady and calm. "That sounds wonderful, Leo. Truly. Your mother is a very generous woman." The lie tasted like ash, but it was necessary. It was the first move in a new game. "We'll have to get together soon, you and me. I have some old photos of your grandmother I think you'd like to see." We made a plan to meet the following week. When I hung up the phone, I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist. I looked at the 2 pieces of paper on my desk, the authentic and the fraudulent. They were no longer symbols of betrayal. They were evidence. They were weapons. My daughter thought she was closing a chapter of my life. She had no idea that she had just armed me to write the final one myself. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about correction. I was going to correct the record, and I knew exactly who to call to help me edit the final draft. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Arthur Pendleton. Arthur and I go back 60 years, back to a time when we were both young men with more ambition than sense. I was chasing rare books, and he was chasing ambulances. As he used to say, he became one of the sharpest, most ruthless estate lawyers in the city, a shark in a pinstripe suit. But with me he was always just Arthur, The man who still laughed about the time we tried to brew beer in our college dorm room and nearly blew up the building. He'd semi-retired a few years ago, claiming he was tired of watching families tear each other apart over silver spoons and porcelain dolls. I had a feeling he might make an exception for my case. His voice on the phone was exactly as I remembered it, a low, gravelly rumble that always sounded both amused and slightly annoyed. "Gordon, is that you? I thought you'd been fossilized in that library of yours. Don't tell me you're finally calling to have me write your will." I chuckled. It felt good. A real, genuine sound. "It's a bit more complicated than that, Arthur. Can I buy you lunch? I have a story to tell you. It's a first edition, and I think you'll find the subject matter compelling." We met at our old haunt, a dimly lit steakhouse downtown that hadn't changed its decor since the 1970s. The leather on the booths was cracked, and the waiters all looked like they'd been there since opening day. It was perfect. Arthur slid into the booth opposite me, looking more like a retired professor than a legal predator now, with his tweed jacket and wire-rimmed glasses. But his eyes were the same, sharp, analytical, missing nothing. He listened without interruption as I laid out the whole sordid affair. I told him about Charlotte's visit, the stack of papers, the feigned concern. I placed the two key pieces of evidence on the table between us, the genuine unsigned linen stock signature page and the small torn corner from the cheap copy paper. I placed them next to the salt shaker like they were exhibits, A and B. Arthur picked up the corner of the fraudulent page between his thumb and forefinger. He rubbed it, then held it up to the light. He didn't need a forensics lab. He was like me, a man who understood the nuances of his trade. 20-pound bond, he grunted. The stuff of desperation. She didn't even spring for the good stuff. The arrogance. He shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. Then he looked at me, and the old amusement was gone, replaced by a cold fire. He said, "The legal term for this, Gordon, is attempted felony, grand larceny, and fraud. We could have her arrested by dinner time." "I know," I said quietly, pushing my untouched plate of food away, "but that's not the plan." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "No? It's a clean case. Open and shut. Why mess around?" "Because of Leo," I said. "My grandson. He's 17. He adores his mother. If I have her arrested, what does that do to him? He'll see me as the villain, the vindictive old man who sent his mom to jail. He'll hate me. And worse, he'll never learn the truth. He'll just believe his mother was the victim. Charlotte will make sure of that." Arthur leaned back, steepling his fingers. He was no longer my old friend. He was my lawyer. "So what do you want, Gordon? Justice or victory? They're not always the same thing." "I want to inoculate my grandson against his mother's poison," I said. "I need to show him who she is, not just tell him. I need him to see it with his own eyes. And to do that, I need to let her think she's winning. I need to give her more rope." A slow smile spread across Arthur's face. It was the smile that had made countless opposing attorneys want to crawl under their desks. "I see," he said, the gravel back in his voice. "You don't want to send her to jail. You want to utterly and completely dismantle her. You want to leave her with nothing but the consequences of her own actions. I have to say, Gordon, for a bookworm, you have a delightfully medieval mind." We spent the next 2 hours sketching out the plan. It was a beautiful, intricate piece of legal and financial architecture. Arthur called it the mousetrap. The first step was to play along. I would call Charlotte, and with a shaky, apologetic voice, tell her that I'd heard from Mr. Peterson, and that there were some additional security forms we needed to fill out to complete the transfer. This was Arthur's genius. We would create a new secondary brokerage account. We'd fund it with a relatively small but still tempting amount of money, say $50,000, an amount that would look like a fortune to Charlotte, but was a pittance compared to the real portfolio. All the new forms I would sign, with her help, would pertain only to this decoy account. "We will draft them ourselves," Arthur explained, his eyes gleaming with professional glee. They will look identical to the real thing. I still have all the old letterhead. We will bury her in paper, Gordon. We will let her build a fortress of fraud around a pile of sand. Step 2 was documentation. Arthur was adamant about this. Gordon, you will become the most meticulous record keeper in human history. Every phone call with her, you log the date, the time, the subject. Better yet, our state has one-party consent for recording conversations. Buy a small digital recorder. Keep it in your pocket. Every time she comes over to help you, you record it. Her condescending tone, her lies about what the documents mean, that is gold. That is what will show Leo the truth, not a legal filing. Step 3 was the slow tightening of the screw. While she was busy draining the decoy account, thinking she was raiding the main vault, Arthur would be working in the background. He would file a provisional power of attorney for me, naming him as my legal agent, superseding any fraudulent documents she might try to file. He would put the real brokerage firm on high alert, creating a new security protocol on my main accounts that would require a complex verbal password known only to me and him. The forged signature page she possessed would be utterly useless. When she finally tried to use it, she would hit a wall of silent, polite, bureaucratic steel. And the final step, the checkmate, was what I came to think of as the reading. Once she was thoroughly entangled in her own lies, once her panic began to set in, I would arrange a final meeting. A family meeting. Just me, Charlotte, and Leo. And I would lay it all out for them, not with anger, but with the quiet, devastating finality of a historical account. I would present the evidence, piece by piece, the recordings, the bank statements from the decoy account, the expert analysis of the paper stocks. I would read from my journal of her deceit. It would be my last lecture. By the time we left the steakhouse, the sun was setting. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just a retired old man anymore. I was a curator of my own life, carefully preparing an exhibit for an audience of one. Arthur clapped me on the shoulder as we stood on the sidewalk. You know, he said, for years I've watched children do this to their parents. They see them as fading assets, not as people. They circle like vultures. It's the ugliest part of human nature. Most of the time, the parents just let it happen. They're too tired or too scared to fight back. He looked me in the eye. I'm glad you're not tired, Gordon. Now go home and be the most convincing, frail, and confused old man you can be. This is going to be a performance worthy of the stage. That night, I didn't see a ghost in my library. I saw a command center. I sat at my desk and took out a fresh, empty journal, a beautiful leather-bound volume with thick, creamy paper. On the first page, I wrote a title, The Charlotte Project. Then I began to write, documenting everything that had happened so far with the cold precision of a historian. The game was afoot, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt the thrill of the hunt. The phone felt unnaturally heavy in my hand. The next day, I had to practice my voice, rehearse the lines Arthur and I had prepared. It was a strange kind of acting. I had to project weakness from a position of newfound strength. I took a few deep breaths, thought of the most pathetic, confused old man I could imagine, and dialed Charlotte's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and impatient. Hello? Charlotte, darling, it's me. It's your father. I made my voice thin, adding a slight waver. Oh, Gordon, is everything all right? There was an edge in her tone, a low-grade annoyance, as if my call was an interruption of something far more important. Yes, I think so, I stammered. It's just, well, it's all so confusing. I got another letter from Mr. Peterson's office, something about additional security protocols for the transfer. I don't understand any of it. My head is just swimming. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. I could picture the flicker of greed in her eyes, mixed with the exasperation of having to deal with her doddering old dad one more time. The sigh on her end of the line was a masterpiece of put-upon martyrdom. Don't you worry about a thing, Gordon. It's probably just more red tape. They always do this. I'll come over this afternoon and we'll sort it all out. Just have the papers ready. I'll have them right here on the desk, I said, my voice full of pathetic gratitude. Thank you, Charlotte. I don't know what I'd do without you. You really don't, she said, and the line went dead. I placed the receiver back in its cradle, my hand perfectly steady. The digital recorder Arthur had recommended, a tiny silver device no bigger than my thumb, was already in my shirt pocket, its little red light blinking silently. The curtain was going up on Act One. When she arrived, she was all business, tapping her foot impatiently, while I did a slow shuffling walk from the living room to my study. She was carrying the same leather satchel, her briefcase of betrayal. I had the documents Arthur had printed out spread across my desk. They were perfect forgeries, right down to the brokerage firm's logo and the fine print at the bottom. "All right, what's all this?" she asked, snatching the pages up. I watched her as she scanned them. They were forms for authorizing a wire transfer, for establishing online account access, for confirming my identity. All of them, of course, were linked to the new decoy account number 7B84C, as I had mentally rehearsed. "This is simple, Gordon," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This form gives me the ability to manage the account online, so I don't have to bother you with every little thing. And this one," she tapped another page, "this lets us move the money more easily. It's for efficiency." Her every word was a small, perfect pearl of evidence, dropping silently into my recorder. I let her guide my hand as I signed each page, making my signature look even more shaky than before. At one point, I accidentally started to sign in the wrong place. No, Gordon, not there," she snapped, grabbing my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Here, pay attention. I am sorry, Charlotte. My eyes aren't what they used to be." The look she gave me was one of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was the look one gives to a broken appliance. I felt a flash of hot anger, but I pushed it down, converting it into fuel. This was exactly what I needed. This was the voice Leo needed to hear. She spent the next hour at my computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she helped me set up the online portal. She created a username and password, writing them down on a sticky note for me. Of course, the password was something simple she could remember. Leo 1998. The irony was sickeningly beautiful. She was using her son's name as the key to steal his own grandfather's legacy. When she was finished, she stood up, a triumphant smile on her face. "There, all set. The funds should be fully accessible within 24 hours. Now don't you touch anything, you understand. I'll handle it from here." I nodded meekly. "Of course, dear. Whatever you say." After she left, I took the little recorder out of my pocket. I sat at my desk and listened to the entire conversation. Hearing her voice, stripped of my physical presence, was even more chilling. The condescension, the impatience, the barely concealed greed. It was all there, a perfect damning portrait. I saved the file, labeling it Charlotte. Visit 2. I was no longer a rare book dealer. I was an archivist of my own betrayal. 2 days later, I checked the decoy account online. As expected, $10,000 had been wired out to an account in her name. The reason stated was living expenses. The next day, another $15,000, this time for home renovations. She was like a starving animal at a feast, gorging herself without a thought. It was both disgusting and exhilarating to watch. Every withdrawal was another nail in her coffin. The first sign of her panic came a week later. It was a call from Charlotte, and for the first time in a long time her voice wasn't condescending. It was tight, strained. "Gordon, I'm having a little trouble with the main account." My heart gave a little leap. The mace trap had been sprung. "The main account?" I asked, feigning confusion. "But I thought you were handling all of that." "I am. It's just, I tried to authorize the full transfer using the form you signed, and they're blocking it. They're saying they need verbal confirmation, and some kind of special password. Did you set up a password? The form I signed. She meant the forgery. She had tried to cash her winning lottery ticket, only to be told it was a fake. A password, I said, my voice a perfect study in elderly bewilderment. Oh my. No. I wouldn't know how to do that. Maybe you should call them again, dear. You're so much better at these things than I am. There was a long, tense silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, shallow and fast. Fine, she finally bit out. I'll handle it. But I knew she couldn't. Arthur had been very clear. The security protocol on the real accounts was ironclad. No one could get through without the password, a ridiculously obscure line from a 17th century metaphysical poem that only he and I knew. Charlotte could call them 100 times, and she would be met with the same polite, impenetrable wall. The silent takeover was complete. She had control of an account with a rapidly dwindling balance of a few $1,000s, while my life's work, my real legacy, was safer than it had ever been. She thought she was holding the keys to the kingdom, but all she had was the key to an empty room. Now, all I had to do was wait for the panic to turn to desperation, and when she was desperate, she would make mistakes. She would get loud, and she would bring my grandson into it. That was the part I dreaded, and the part I knew was necessary. The stage was set for the final act. The shift was subtle at first. A week went by with no contact, which was unusual. Charlotte was the type who called when she wanted something, and the silence meant she was stewing, trying to figure out her next move. The panic, I imagined, was a low simmer. My own life, in contrast, had become remarkably peaceful. The heavy weight of dread was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused calm. I spent my days in the library, not just reading but truly enjoying my collection for the first time in years. I'd pull down a first edition of Whitman, the paper so crisp it still felt alive, and feel a connection to it again. The work of my hands, the work of my mind, it was all still mine. The real joy, however, came from my meeting with Leo. I had him over for lunch that Saturday. I made my famous pot roast, the one his grandmother had taught me how to cook. As we sat at the old oak dining table, the same table where I'd helped him with his homework as a boy, I felt a pang of sadness for the chasm that was about to open in his life. But it was a necessary pain, like setting a broken bone. I didn't mention his mother or the money. Instead, I pulled out an old photo album, one Eleanor had meticulously put together. There were pictures of her as a young woman, her smile so open and genuine it hurt to look at. There were pictures of their wedding, of me as a young man with a full head of hair, looking terrified and ecstatic. Your grandmother, I told him, believed that a person's character was the only thing they truly owned. Everything else, money, houses, possessions, it's all just temporary. It can be lost or stolen. But your integrity, no one can take that from you. You have to give it away. Leo was quiet, tracing the outline of his grandmother's face in a faded photograph. He said, "Mom talks about her all the time, about how much she wanted us to see Italy together." I just nodded. "I know she does, Leo. It was her dream." Then I gently planted the seed. I asked him, "So, this big trip, is your mom taking time off from work?" Leo shifted uncomfortably. He was a good kid and a terrible liar. Yeah, I think so. She said she's been working really hard, and she mentioned she had to take out a small loan to cover the hotels, just until her big bonus comes through. A loan. My $50,000 wasn't enough, it seemed. She was already leveraging her anticipated windfall, borrowing against a fortune she hadn't yet stolen. The sheer reckless entitlement of it was staggering. I didn't press. I just let his words hang in the air. A loan. For a surprise trip she'd been saving up for years. Even to a 17-year-old, The logic was starting to fray. I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes, a small question mark forming. That was enough for now. The family exodus had begun, not with a dramatic schism but with a quiet seed of doubt. The simmering panic finally boiled over 2 days later. My phone rang, and it was Charlotte, her voice shrill and accusatory. "Dad," she didn't even bother with my first name this time. "We have to go down to the brokerage office. Right now, they won't talk to me anymore. They're saying the account is flagged for unusual activity, and they need to speak to the primary account holder in person. You need to come with me and clear this up." Her use of Dad was a weapon now, a claim of authority she no longer possessed. "Oh dear," I said, injecting a note of alarm into my voice. "That sounds very serious. I don't know if I'm up for a trip downtown." "Don't be ridiculous. It's your money. You have to do this." She was practically shouting. The desperation was rolling off her in waves. Her plan was failing, and her only solution was to bully the broken old man she thought I was into fixing it for her. "I'm sorry, Charlotte. I'm just not feeling well. Maybe another day." Her response was a choked sound of fury and frustration. This was the countermove I'd been waiting for. The desperate escalation. "Fine," she hissed. "If you won't come with me, I'm coming to you, and I'm bringing Leo. Maybe seeing his disappointed face will convince you to stop being so difficult. We'll be there in an hour." She hung up before I could respond. The threat was vile, using her own son as a shield, as an emotional cudgel, but it was also a gift. She was bringing my entire case, my key witness and my primary evidence directly to my door. She was walking straight into the trap, holding her son's hand as she did. I called Arthur. "It's time," I said. His voice was calm and ready. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Just set the stage, Gordon. It's time for the reading." I spent the next 20 minutes preparing my library. This was my courtroom. I cleared the large mahogany desk that had been my father's. I placed a single chair on one side. For me. I placed 2 chairs on the other side, for the accused and her hostage. On the polished wood, I arranged my evidence with the care of a museum curator. The genuine signature page, the fraudulent corner of paper, a printed report from the paper specialist Arthur had hired, a friend of his from the university, detailing the chemical and fibrous differences between the two. The small silver digital recorder, a stack of bank statements from the decoy account, with every one of her withdrawals highlighted in yellow, and finally my leather-bound journal, open to the first page. When Arthur arrived, he gave the room a slow, appreciative look. "Excellent," he said with a grim smile. "The lighting is suitably dramatic. Are you ready for this?" I looked at the 2 empty chairs. "For Leo's sake, I am." The power had already shifted. Charlotte just didn't know it yet. She was coming to my home to issue demands, to exert the control she thought she rightfully owned. She had no idea she was arriving for a sentencing. She thought she was the storm. She was about to find out she was just a bit of paper, about to be caught in a hurricane. The doorbell rang precisely 1 hour after her call. The sound echoed through the quiet house like a summons. Arthur gave me a short, firm nod and retreated to the adjoining sitting room, leaving the library door slightly ajar. He was my silent witness, my legal backstop, present but unseen. I walked to the front door, my steps slow and measured, the walk of an old man, a role I had perfected over the past few weeks. When I opened the door, the sight was exactly what I had expected, and it still managed to turn my stomach. Charlotte stood there, her face a mask of righteous fury, her hand gripping Leo's upper arm. Leo looked bewildered, uncomfortable, a boy dragged into an adult conflict he didn't understand. "We need to talk, Dad," Charlotte said, pushing past me into the foyer. "In your study, now." She propelled Leo forward, marching him down the hall as if he were a prisoner of war. I followed, closing the front door with a soft final click. The sound seemed to hang in the air. When they entered the library, they both stopped short. The tableau I had arranged on the desk had the desired effect. It was formal, official, and deeply unsettling. It was not the setting for a casual family chat. "What is all this?" Charlotte demanded, her eyes darting from the papers to my face, a flicker of uncertainty finally breaking through her anger. Leo just stared, his eyes wide, taking in the scene. "Please, sit," I said, my voice calm and even. I gestured to the two chairs I had placed opposite my own. It was a command, not a request. After a moment's hesitation, they sat. Charlotte perched on the edge of her seat, ready to spring. Leo sank into his, looking small and lost. I took my seat behind the desk. The rich, dark wood felt like a shield, a bench of judgment. I let the silence stretch out, letting the weight of the room settle on them. It was Charlotte, of course, who broke it. "I don't have time for games, Dad. Leo is very disappointed in you. You promised you'd help us, and now you're backing out. We have to go to the bank." I looked at my grandson. "Disappointed, Leo. Is that what your mother told you? That I was backing out of a promise?" Leo looked from his mother's furious face to my calm one. He faltered. She said, "You were confused. That you weren't well," he trailed off, but I knew the word. "That I wasn't well, that I was losing my mind." "I see," I said softly. Then I turned my full attention to my daughter. The time for playing the frail old man was over. My voice became the voice she hadn't heard in years, the voice of her father, clear, firm, and absolute. "Charlotte, you came here to talk about money. Your money, you believe. So let's talk about it. Let's start with this." I picked up the genuine linen stock signature page and slid it across the desk toward her. "Do you recognize this? It's the signature page for a full transfer of assets from my primary account. The one you left behind by mistake." Her face went pale. A dull mottled red crept up her neck. She stared at the page as if it were a snake. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "Then perhaps you recognize this." I picked up the tiny corner of cheap copy paper and placed it next to the first page. "This is from the page you had me sign. The one you slipped into the stack. 20-pound copy bond. Not quite the same, is it? One is a document of security. The other is the stuff of cheap fraud." I then pushed the lab report from the paper specialist across the desk. It was full of technical terms, fiber length, chemical composition, rag content. But the conclusion on the final page was written in plain, simple English. "The two samples are not from the same source. Sample B is a low-grade commercial copy paper." Charlotte stared at the papers, her mouth opening and closing silently. All the righteous anger had drained out of her, replaced by the stark primal fear of being caught. "It wasn't about the money, Charlotte. Not at first. It was about this." I tapped the fraudulent paper. "It was about the fact that you looked at me, your father, and thought I was so stupid, so irrelevant, that I wouldn't even notice the paper in my own hands." Then I reached over and pressed the play button on the small silver recorder. Her own voice filled the silent room, tinny and sharp. No, Gordon, not there. Here, pay attention." Then my own feigned, shaky response. "I am sorry, Charlotte. My eyes aren't what they used to be." Then her voice again, dripping with contempt, from another recording. "Don't you touch anything, you understand. I'll handle it from here." Leo flinched as if he'd been struck. He was hearing his mother's true voice for the first time, unfiltered by his love for her. He stared at her, his expression a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. Finally, I pushed the stack of highlighted bank statements across the desk. $50,000. Gone in less than 2 weeks. "A trip to Italy, Charlotte?" I asked softly. "A trip your grandmother always dreamed of." You were going to buy my grandson's affection with my money, and call it your own generosity. You weren't just stealing my savings. You were stealing my memories. I leaned back in my chair. The prosecution rested. Charlotte crumpled. Her entire body seemed to fold in on itself. The mask of the powerful put-upon daughter shattered, revealing the grasping, terrified person underneath. "Dad, I can explain," she stammered, the words catching in her throat. "I needed it. You have so much, you don't even use it." It was for Leo, for his future. Leo stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "For me?" he asked, his voice shaking with a rage. I had never heard from him before. "You lied to me. You lied about everything. About Grandpa, about Grandma, about the money. You used me." He looked at his mother with the eyes of a stranger, his face a mask of utter betrayal. "I'm so sorry, Grandpa. I had no idea." "I know you didn't, son," I said gently. "This isn't your fault." Charlotte began to sob. Not the tears of remorse, but the tears of defeat. She pleaded. She begged. She made excuses. But the words were meaningless now. The evidence on the desk was irrefutable. The truth was out, stark and ugly, right there in the library air. I let her cry for a moment, before I spoke the final lines. From the sitting room, I heard a slight cough. Arthur's signal. "It's over, Charlotte. My lawyer, Mr. Pendleton, is waiting in the next room. He has a document for you to sign. It's a legally binding agreement. You will relinquish all claims, present and future, to my estate. You will repay every cent you took from the decoy account. In return, I will not press criminal charges for fraud and larceny. Those are your choices. Sign the paper, or I make a phone call to the district attorney." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. She looked at me, searching for a hint of the soft, pliable old man she had taken for granted for so long. She found none. She looked at her son, hoping for an ally. He wouldn't even meet her gaze. She was utterly, completely alone, shipwrecked on the island of her own greed. The new reality had arrived, and it was bleak. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. There were no more dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches. There was only the rustle of paper and the grim finality of a signature. Arthur handled everything with his signature blend of icy professionalism and quiet satisfaction. He met with Charlotte and her hastily hired lawyer the next day, faced with the mountain of evidence, the recordings, the paper analysis, the bank statements. Her lawyer advised her to sign without argument, and so she did. She signed away her inheritance, her connection to our family, her future. She signed the document that legally acknowledged the consequences of her actions. It was a full and unconditional surrender. The $50,000 from the decoy account was repaid within a month, funded, I later learned, by a second mortgage on her condo. The grand trip to Italy vanished like a morning mist. The life of easy credit, funded by my quiet generosity and her future expectations, was over. I instructed my broker, the real Mr. Peterson, to remove her from every account, every beneficiary list, every mailing. In the cold, hard language of finance and law, she was erased. The most profound change, however, was in Leo. He was devastated, adrift. The mother he thought he knew had been a carefully constructed fiction. He stayed with me for a few weeks after the confrontation, sleeping in the guest room that had once been his mother's. We didn't talk much about what had happened. We didn't need to. Instead, we cooked. We watched old movies. I taught him how to properly care for a leather-bound book, how to hold it, how to turn the pages without stressing the spine. I was trying to give him a new foundation, something solid and real to stand on, built on quiet truths instead of glittering lies. One evening, he came into the library as I was cataloging a new acquisition. He stood there for a moment, then said, "I should have seen it. There were signs, the way she talked about you, the way she always needed something. I just didn't want to see it." I put down my pen and looked at him. "Leo, love is a powerful thing. It can make you blind, But the important thing is, when your eyes are opened, you have to be brave enough to look at what's really there. You were brave. He moved back in with his mother, not because he had forgiven her, but because, as he put it, he was the adult in the house now. Their relationship is formal, strained. He is polite. He is respectful, but the warmth is gone. He is finishing his last year of high school, and he's applied for scholarships, determined to make his own way. I am immensely proud of him. The legacy I was trying to protect wasn't the money. It was him. It was his character. And in that I believe I succeeded. As for me, a great and profound peace has settled over my life. The house is quiet again, but it's a good quiet. It's the silence of sanctuary, not of a tomb. I severed a part of my life, and it was painful, like an amputation, but it was necessary to save the rest. I no longer live in fear of the chill, no longer hold my breath waiting for the next demand. My money is mine. My home is mine. My memories are mine. So why am I telling you all of this? Because my story, in its own strange way, isn't just about a forged document or a stolen inheritance. It's about being seen. For years, my daughter looked at me, but she didn't see me. She saw a resource, a living trust fund, an obstacle on the path to what she felt she was owed. She forgot that the old man in the chair was still the man who built the life she so desperately coveted. It wasn't about the money until she made it all about the money, and when she did, she gave me a strange and terrible gift. She forced me to stand up and prove my own value, not just in dollars and cents, but as a man. I had to become my own authenticator, to hold my own life up to the light and declare it genuine. If you're out there and you feel like you're becoming invisible to the people who should see you most clearly, if you feel like you're being valued for what you have instead of who you are, please listen to that feeling. It's a warning. Don't wait for a betrayal as blatant as mine. Your life, your work, your memories, they are your own first editions. They are priceless, and they are worth protecting. Take it from an old book, man. The most valuable thing you will ever own is your own story. Make sure you're the one who gets to write the ending. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And if you have a story of your own, about a time you had to stand up and reclaim your own narrative, I'd be honored if you'd share it in the comments below. It's in sharing these stories that we remind each other that we are not alone.